This is Module 3, and here we'll be looking at team assessment. So when you develop a team, it generally occurs in 3 phases. The first phase is team assessment, the second phase is the team development sessions, and the third phase is team follow-up. And when you're assessing the team, you look into the current dynamics of the team. So what's currently happening? Who are the team members? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And how are they working together? So when it comes to the development sessions, the intention here is to accelerate the team members' skills to operate as a high-performance team. And then with the follow-up, with each team member, it allows you to debrief on the team's performance and review the results of the team. So you can see here there's a real flow when it comes to developing a team. You first assess the team to see what they're made of, you then develop the team to help them work better together, and then you have a follow-up to assess how you've done. Now, to develop teams and to optimize their performance, most organizations train their members on core competencies that are involved when working in an effective team. So to start with, the members of the team have to be skilled and in alignment with the team goals and business goals, be accountable for results, look for continuous improvement, and strive for better results. They have to also trust each other, maybe be able to coach each other, define their expectations, their communication styles, resolve conflict, and maybe even work virtually in different regions. So there's a lot of work that organizations do to make sure teams are effective when it comes to working together. When we look at high performance teams, you can come across some conflict in those teams. But conflict can be both functional and dysfunctional. So in a high performing team, functional conflict is when disagreement is aimed at issues, ideas, and principles, but when it's dysfunctional, when you're not agreeing and there's conflict, that's actually aimed at people, emotions, and values, and feel like a personal attack. Another form of functional conflict is when it results in a solution to move closer to the team goals. So you're disagreeing on some issues and ideas, but you find a solution that helps you move towards a team goal. But when it's dysfunctional, the attack is personal and it makes some team members take their energy away from making progress towards the goal of the team, so they lack motivation in getting the job done. But when conflict is functional, it actually embraces the involvement of all the team members. But when it's dysfunctional, it actually destroys morale. And also when conflict is functional, it builds cohesiveness among the team members and actually helps the team spirit, helps the team move forward. But when it's dysfunctional, it polarizes team members, it isolates them, and they no longer form team. When it comes to team development, The Brandon Hall Group created a team performance study and found that there are some key things that are more important in terms of priorities when it comes to team development than other things. So almost half of what's important to a team is strengthening the team to better support business initiatives and the goals of the organization. The next thing in line is actually being able to motivate teams to drive the results in a certain direction or in one key direction. And parallel to that is actually team engagement and continuous improvement. What's slightly less important is developing leadership to specifically manage certain teams. And then the three things that are not as important is building trust amongst team members, coaching the team, defining team norms and expectations. So looking at this list, and when you're looking at your idea of what makes a functional team or a high-performing team, do you think these priorities are in the right order? So can you tell me the secret to creating and managing all-star teams or high-performing teams? The secret actually is held in three important steps. The first is to evaluate your team and have a look at who are your high performers. Some studies show that when you look at the difference in productivity in the teams, high performers will outperform 35% of the average performers. That's quite high. So they work a third of the time way better and more productive. But actually, identifying high performers in your team can be quite a challenge. Now, Jim Collins, who is the author of an excellent book called From Good to Great, he thinks that you actually need a very formal approach in identifying your high performers, and one that isn't based on politics. And it has to be consistent, and you have to be able to observe the metrics. You have to be able to prove who is a high performer and why. So Jim Collins suggests that you start by recognizing key behaviors and competencies that exist in high performers, and then use these to benchmark and measure employees, which basically helps you to be more objective and you can actually justify the decision you've made. So step one is to evaluate your team. Step two is to then identify competencies and skill gaps. So where are people needing most development? Where are they developed? And in the gap in the middle, how are you actually going to address all of that? So now you've identified your high performers, what's next? You have to look at using 180 and 360-degree reviews, self-assessments and competency evaluations to actually get the bigger picture of what skill gaps are. So you allow your team to assess themselves and to assess each other. You then have to create what's called a cycle of continual development. So you will assign specific training to specific people to allow them to actually improve their skill set. And also, you might find that your employees in your companies will actually demand for training as well. So they'll actually assess themselves and look at what skills do I need to do my job, and where's there a shortfall, and where can my company help me develop better, which helps you as a leader because they actually self-identify what training they need. And the third step into creating a high-performing team is to actually tie all of your people practices together and create a full view of your team's capabilities. And effectively, it's understood that performance uncovers where development is needed from people. So how they do their job and what they achieve will allow you to see where development is needed. Training then strengthens people in those areas and helps fill the training gap. And then succession planning combines the two to grow your future leaders. So successful companies actually intervene every aspect of people management to build the most productive teams and to keep those teams working together well. Let's have a look at a case study of a team that doesn't seem to be performing well and what you would do to help it perform well based on the three-step process we've just seen. So the scenario is that there is a $1 billion plus turnover technology firm, and what they're achieving is a very poor sales pipeline. They're not achieving their sales goals, but they have a very low turnover in the managers in their sales team. So they're not achieving their goals, they don't have many prospects, but they also retain all of their managers. The VP of sales wants the sales managers to assess their work and go forward with a plan to increase the quota and the pipeline worldwide. So the idea is that now we'll have a look at how this team is performing and how can we help improve the organizational performance when it comes to sales. The VP has tried several things that haven't worked. Amongst those is actually looking at external recruiters to bring in better management and talent. And the other thing that the VP of Sales tried is to actually train the sales managers more. So they actually receive 3 weeks worth of training a year, but none of this has worked to improve the performance of the team. What actually worked is when the VP of Sales created a sales management assessment to see what the root cause of the problem was, then created a plan to address the root cause, and actually created quarterly audits so you can continually assess the performance of the team. Now let's have a look at the assessment of the sales management team that was done by the VP of Sales. So the VP of Sales looked at analysing data in terms of the amount of sales each manager and their team brought in, conducted interviews, followed them out on the field to observe how they do, did some surveys, and actually reviewed the procedures that are followed by the sales managers and their teams. Then they selected relevant metrics, compared these to the peers in their industry, so how are other people doing, and actually created a sales management maturity model, and then they put together some recommendations for actions going forward. So when you look at team management or team development in this model for a sales team, you can see that there are 5 different levels the team must grow towards. The first one is chaos. This is when everybody's doing what they want, the goals are set, but nobody's actually working towards the goals because everybody has different processes and procedures. The next level they progress to is having standardized processes. So rather than everybody doing what they want, they now have a set process they follow in order to do their job. They then progress to level 3, which is the reportable level. This means that there are very basic sales management skills in place in the management team, and they seek sales reports from their team members. Level 4 is then having a managed team where you have quantitative sales management, so you use numbers to assess how your team is doing. You set goals based on numbers, and then you measure the achievement of those goals based on statistics. And the 5th level and final level that the teams mature to is to be predictable. So this is where you know that the processes you put in place, you can use those to predict the sales outcome. So you can see why level 1 is the most ineffective team and level 5 is the most effective team. And when it comes to the model the example we looked at earlier from the technology business, where do you think they sit in the maturity model? Are they at level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Here's an extract from the survey the VP of Sales did. One of the questions asked, what are the top 3 things that interfere with your performance as a sales manager? You can see here that one of the biggest things that actually interfered was the internal processes and admin. It created a lot of complexity in their jobs and it was very time consuming. But then the other things that interfered were the complexity of the organization and how much reporting they had to do. So what would have to happen here is the VP of Sales will have to streamline all processes to actually improve productivity. Now let's have a look at field time on the survey. So one of the questions was, on average, how many meetings do you attend each week with the decision maker of a customer or a prospect? Now these meetings are quite key because the more of those meetings that you attend, the more likely you are to close a deal. But it showed that actually most of the employees only attended between 1 and 4 meetings a week, which meant that the managers gave a low priority to time devoted to forecasting and reporting. 52% of all sales managers attended up to 2 field rides with a sales rep per week. It just wasn't enough to achieve the kind of sales that they wanted. Next, the VP of Sales looked at the span of control. So how many sales managers do each of the how many salespeople do each of the managers lead? And in a team of 10 to 13, that was a lot of administrative responsibility, which meant they were not able to be as effective with large teams as they could be with small teams. During the interviews that the VP of Sales did, it became very obvious that there was no consistent method for developing the managers. So every director used their own methods for development. Nobody really used the internal resources consistently. Some preferred external training resources, but they had a problem with the budget. They didn't have enough of a budget. Some of them had monthly staff meetings. Some of them had one-on-ones with the managers. So there was a real difference in how the managers managed their teams. They also didn't have a sales manager onboarding program, which basically meant that there was no real training program in place to bring new sales managers on board, and the directors provided very little support to help during that process. In terms of the actual portfolio that they had to sell, this portfolio included very complex sales products, and there was no real one-size-fits-all product that everybody could actually sell. They then saw a lot of conflicting priorities across the product teams, and the directors actually didn't realize how much strain their sales managers were under. So this interview series was actually quite useful to understand what was happening under the hood of this particular team. The sales manager then looked at the industry averages, and they had to see where is it that we sit in terms of closing the deal, an average deal size, the turnover rate of our clients, how much time it takes to make a sale, and it became very obvious that what is industry standard or world class was very different to what was happening in the company. So they had a very low turnover rate of people, which meant poor performers just didn't leave the company. The selling time was far too long. They didn't have a process that is disciplined when it comes to sales, which basically resulted in a conflict in the metrics. The recommendations of the sales manager was basically to look at 5 key priorities. The first priority was to accelerate the training of the sales managers and give them sales leadership coaching. Then came the need for hunter reps who would actually hunt new leads. The next priority would be to actually create skills training for sales managers, and then they would actually realign the quota setting to make the quotas more realistic. After implementing all these measures, the results are quite striking. So management turnover went up by 3%. The pipeline to quota ratio more than doubled, and the quota attainment almost doubled as well. And even though management turnover may look like bad news, it was actually good news because it meant poor performers left the company. And that brings us to the end of this module on team assessment.